And now to our final speaker, who I asked them all to describe themselves, and Julie's been very concise. Julie Bindel is a journalist and feminist campaigner. I just want to make clear that that's her description, and I'm not just giving that in some kind of way, like, I just want to know platform hours. I'm not going to say very much about that. But anyway, Julie, over to you.
Thank you. So I can't hold the mic, and I may sit down in the middle because I've got a really painful back, so bear with me, please. I want to start by looking at the very first time somebody mentioned to me that I may have been victim of hate speech. It was about 20 years ago, and I'd just been on TV arguing about rape. Clearly you'll understand what my side of the argument was, that men shouldn't do it, or get away with it, ideally. And there were men's rights activists saying something very different. And I got dropped off near to where I live in North London and went into the bank. And I was just going up to the cashier's desk, and a man came up to me and said, "Are you that bird?" That isn't the hate bit. "Are you that bird that's just been going on about rape?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Well, you're too fucking ugly to rape." And the cashier, a young woman, looked at me, and her face was just full of empathy. And she said, "Oh, that's awful. You're not. No, you're not." What do you do with that? Do you say thank you? Do you call him back and say, "Look, you're not necessarily right"? But I use that example as an everyday example of the kind of things that get thrown at by women, by feminists, by lesbians, sometimes we're all three, and stupid comments, such as one where I was with 500 women in Leeds at a benefit, a feminist benefit, upstairs in the Trades Club. And on going downstairs to use the bar there, because strangely enough, our women were drinking rather a lot up there. And I was with a friend, and these two blokes that were drinking in the regular bar said, "What's going on up there?" And the other one said, "I don't know, but there's about 500 women up there on their own." In challenging this, just in challenging the mathematics of that, we went from just being girls to cunts and then to lesbians. So, I'm possibly not going to say what you think I will be saying tonight, because I'm actually against hate crime legislation in the main, not when we get to the high bar. That's coming from me now. Not when we get to the high bar of incitement to violence, not when we're talking about harm on a particular level, but I don't want any more legislation on this, because we have a Crown Prosecution Service and a police force that are idiots and apolitical and don't get it right. So I don't actually want misogyny to be made a hate crime, because there are so many heterosexual women who would be picking up the phone several times a day for regular, everyday atrocities that happen. And as somebody's already pointed out, it would be unworkable. What I actually want, as Kathleen said, is for crimes against women and girls, sexual violence and harassment, to be detected and to be convicted. That's what I want. We have, as many of you will know, right now, the attrition rate with rape in this country. So from reporting, which is a small minority, to the actual end result, we have a 1.5 conviction rate for rape. Now, either 98% of women are lying, or men are raping with impunity. I want those men arrested, I want them charged, and I want them convicted. Now, when we look at the perception of crime being seen as aggravated when it's seen as a hate crime, and I'm going to give you a US example now, I think it's as difficult and as problematic for the law and for justice as victim impact statements. So again, probably not what you expect me to say, but I think if you talk about victim impact statements in cases where women have been murdered, raped, mutilated, etc. by men, and you have a prostituted woman who has no family and no friends, who makes the victim impact statement for her, and who do the victim impact statements get made on behalf of? So we shouldn't be influencing sentencing with victim impact statements. We should allow loved ones to make them after the sentencing, because it can be cathartic. But as a feminist who isn't a lawyer, but who's been close to the criminal justice system, well, that was a long time ago. I mean, actually working within to try and fix the system. I think that if we add more law and make it more complex and just keep throwing legislation after legislation, we'll forget that at the moment there is an amnesty on men who commit crimes against us. So the example I'm going to give you is the case of Matthew Shepard in the US. Have you heard of Matthew Shepard? No. So he was murdered in 1998, a young gay man. And his murder was horrific, as murders often are. And he was attacked by two young men one night after a night out. And he was pistol whipped, and he was tied to a fence outdoors in the freezing cold. And then they set him on fire, and he was left to die. Now, Matthew Shepard, his case changed the law. Every single bit of the gay and liberal press, understandably, were appalled at what had happened, said enough is enough, that lesbians and gay men have had enough violence and abuse, and look where we are now. So the two men were convicted of first-degree murder and given life sentences. And in 2009, President Obama signed the Matthew Shepard Act, which enshrined hate crime in law. So aggravated. So even longer sentences, which if you know anything about the US criminal justice system, you'll realise how pointless this is. And then, of course, he was the poster boy for fighting hate crime against gay people. And many, many gay rights organisations got significant amounts of funding to lobby for Matthew's law. His parents regularly spoke on TV. And then an investigative journalist, an award-winning journalist, who's gay himself, called Steve Jimenez, wrote a book, The Book of Matt, based on 13 years of research. And immediately, he was labelled a revisionist, a Holocaust denier, kind of on the scale of a homophobe. Because he told the truth about what happened to Matthew Shepard and who his killers were. Now, I wrote about his book, which came out in 2014. You can read it. It's a long Observer magazine piece. And why does it matter? A young gay man was murdered. Laws were changed. That's good, isn't it? He was horrifically murdered. Nobody can deny that. But I would say it does matter. Because the story of Matthew Shepard is this. He was, as a teenager, brutally gang raped, a group of men. The trauma of this and the fact that his family did not want to know led him to become addicted to crystal meth, led him to be ensnared by predators, by men who prostituted him. And the young men who murdered Matthew Shepard were also exploited in prostitution. They were also addicted to crystal meth, and they were trying to steal Matthew Shepard's drugs to escape their pimp. Does the story of Matthew Shepard not matter? And does the story of those young men not matter? Because the hate in Matthew Shepard's life started way before these so-called homophobes, at least one of whom was gay, carried out their dreadful, dreadful act. But of course, the gay rights organisations went berserk, said that just by writing this book, Jimenez was committing an act of hate, and they would not have it. And this is the problem, I think, with some hate crime legislation. It puts certain groups above others when his murder was hateful enough for anyone's imagination, and certainly for a judge to recognise that they were dangerous at that time. So, if we were to extend legislation already in place, have a think about who might be the only person that could get viciously beaten in the street who couldn't use this. Right. Just hold that thought there while I just read you a very brief email that I received from a man, of course, handily also a vegan, because he was able to kill two birds with one stone, which you will hear. I think I'd written something about veganism. That I was a fat, ugly, dirt common Jewish cunt, and I will rape you with a rib of beef. So I thought, this has gone too far. How dare you call me dirt common? So I rang Scotland Yard. I was advised to really call this one in. It's gone too far. And the woman, who was lovely, the police officer on the other end of the phone, scratched her head and said, "We might be onto something with the Jewish bit." I thought, oh, for fuck's sake. Now, who is this person who you could legitimately beat up in the street and there's no aggravating factors? The white, straight, able-bodied, non-elderly man. But what if he identifies as a lesbian? Right? The woman bit just wouldn't do, clearly. He would have to identify as a lesbian. So it's meaningless. Can we not actually just have the police, as Kath said, as the others have said, do their job? I actually don't think we need anything that describes a crime against women as aggravating. When we're being raped and murdered and beaten, when terrible things are happening to girls and women every day at the hands of men, that is misogyny. There is no aggravating factor. That's it. You can't aggravate misogyny. So, as I say, we've got an apolitical and useless criminal justice system making these decisions. You've already heard enough about that. Which is why I did make a kind of joke at one stage when I was being interviewed before a conference on feminism, that we should have a Matrix, you know the Matrix film? Where pre-crime is dealt with. Hence my not very popular idea of some sort of I like to describe it as a holiday camp, but enclosed, where all men are placed, for now, for crimes unnamed and yet to be committed.
That was Minority Report.
Ah, yes, you're right. We'll talk about Matrix later, I'm sure there's something in that as well. But yes, you're right. So they don't have a terrible time. They've no porn and they can't get on the internet, but they've got quad bikes or white vans, or they've got bicycles. Their own choice of transport. Female wardens. And their loved ones, whether it's their mum, their sister, or their lover, can go and borrow them like a library book, take them away, put them back. Now, when I suggested this, like I say, half-heartedly, it was just, running out of ideas fast. We're still being raped and murdered. Apparently, according to the men's rights activist, I wanted to put all men in a Nazi concentration camp. So it went from my fun time, with, yes, locked doors and wardens, to something heinous. So what do we do? Well, we've already agreed, all of us, we know, that implementation is really, really important with the law. And anything that will detract the police from doing this, trust me, they will do. And the Crown Prosecution Service, that seem to actually be even worse right now than the police, which is quite some feat. So we need laws to be normative. We need the laws to change hearts and minds as well. But mainly we need men to stop committing these crimes, and an amnesty on them, which we pretty much have at the moment, isn't going to do it. Now have a look at the law that, I think it's 10 countries now so far, since 1999, when the first country, Sweden, did this. Look at the law criminalising the demand for prostitution. So it's a criminal law. It's not a hate crime, because we know that men paying for sex and abusing prostituted women, boys, men, whoever, is hateful. We know that. And there were calls way back to actually make the purchasing of sex a hate crime. Please imagine how that would work. The vast majority of people excuse, minimise, sanitise the abuse of women in prostitution. They call it anything but. They will absolutely go to any length they can to say that men need this, it's fine for men, it's harmless. But in making paying for sex a crime, it's deterred so many generations of young men. You just have to compare the law in the Netherlands and in Germany and some states in Nevada, where the sex trade is completely the Wild West, legalised or decriminalised. You just have to compare the attitudes of young people in those countries with young people in Sweden, in Northern Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, in France, elsewhere, where they've actually said, no, this is not acceptable, and there will be a penalty. Now, when the first law on this was brought in Sweden, like I say, 21 years ago now, most police officers and most citizens were against it. But just like the Stopping Smoking in Buildings law, if you have a public awareness and education campaign that runs alongside introducing new criminal law, people have no choice but to get it. And then hearts and minds might change. And if we can't change the hearts and minds of violent and abusive men, well, then we're going to have to lock them up, aren't we? And I'll just end with my own experience of being visited by 2 police officers at my home for a tweet. Now, little did they know that I live with Harriet Wistrich. And she happened to be in at the time. And I'd been reported for a tweet about rape. I'd written something in The Guardian. I suggested that it might be better if men don't do it. All of the men's rights activists piled on me. And apparently what I was saying was all men rape women all the time, everywhere, every opportunity. So I tweeted, okay, boys, you've got it. Yes, just, you should all be locked up. You're all potential rapists. Put you in the slammer. Oh, and by the way, I'll go around and shoot a few of you at the same time, just to, up the ante. I was reported by a Dutch trans woman for crimes unknown. And if that doesn't convince you that the extreme transgender ideology is in fact just a men's rights movement, I don't know what does. Thank you.